thank you so much for joining us, Moana. We're very excited about tonight.
Kia ora. I didn't actually realise that's what your name stood for, your acronym.
Big Hairy News. That's us.
Yeah. Gee whiz. I learn something every day. I love it.
The truth is, though, it didn't start off to be like hairy people. I had this idea about, people talk about big, hairy, audacious goals. You know that? The big, hairy, audacious goal. Okay. I thought about the big, hairy, audacious news story of the day. So it kind of started there, but people have sort of evolved it into, look at the beards. But whatever.
For some reason. Who knows why?
Who knows?
Thanks for joining us, man. This is a pleasure, and a big thanks to Bomber for connecting us as well, because without him, none of this would be happening. All credit goes to him. Cool. Thanks for coming on board. We just said to our punters in the last kind of week or so, who are your faves from this year? And sometimes there were people who had been on with us. Sometimes there were people who we have used as commentary in our show. So we take other people's interviews and commentary and we put it in our show, and then we watch it together and we kind of comment on it and take it apart. And your name came up amongst those people that we've had so far. And very, very excited to have you on. So thank you.
Thank you for your warm welcome. Kia ora. Tēnā kōrua.
I want to start with a bit of a weird one, because I was going to ask you how you sort of transitioned from singer through to what you do now, especially with Te Ao. But because I'm a moron and I was a teenager when some of your music came out, I'm only just learning now what an impact you would have had and the lyrics that you used, and how it kind of feels like 1990 you were sort of educating the country, but just in a very different way. Like I put on Black Pearl today, right? Because I wanted to listen to it again. And for the first time, I heard the words and went, holy shit. And for those who haven't heard it, Black Pearl, precious little girl, let me put you up where you belong. You've been in the background far too long. And it just, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like, that feels like the theme to what you're still doing with your interviewing and your show today. Am I right? Am I seeing that right? That you've sort of been doing this in different versions and different ways your whole career?
That's very kind of you. And I must admit that I didn't actually write Black Pearl, but Murray Kamek, who was a game changer in the music industry and recorded lots of bands, including my earlier incarnation, Moana and the Morehunters and She Heart, and I don't know, groups like Double D and Half a T or something like that. He suggested that we do that to sort of gain a public profile, and then and because it was very much kind of the sort of thing that I was into. I was I suppose being described as an activist or a radical back then. And so we put that out. I remember being nearly 9 months pregnant at the time, so wobbling around on the video set. And then that went up to number 2. It was caught out by a song. It didn't make number 1 because there was a song called "Do the Bart Thing."
Do the Bart Thing. Yeah, I remember that.
Do the Bart Thing. Anyway, that went to number 1. Anyway, it was a cunning plan of Murray's. We got a gold record and all that sort of stuff, and we got all this profile. Everyone's like, "Oh, aren't they cool? They're like, Māori, soul, R&B." And then he goes, right, come on now. Let's get in there. Let's write something that's very radical in terms of what New Zealand music industry might tip it over a little bit. So we wrote A, or U. There was a bunch of us from my band to promote the language. It's kind of ironic. I had a party here on the weekend and I was hauling out these old songs. And I was thinking, oh, my God, they're like just as relevant now. Isn't it ridiculous? Yeah. So A, or U. After that came Treaty, where I had my haka performers actually create a haka using the actual articles of the treaty. And then the chorus line was, "Won't go away, treaty won't go away." And then there was a rap inspired by what was happening back then in 1996. I mean, this is how long ago that was massive protests around the government called for a public debate on the treaty. Gee, that sounds familiar, eh? They wanted to put a fiscal cap on treaty settlements. They wanted to do like everything's going to be settled, 1 billion, and so our people were like, well, hang on, let's wind it back a bit. So treaty was, written about that. That became a bit of an anthem. And then even in later years now, when I think about what's been going on it's only been a couple of weeks since the new government's been formed. I wrote a song on my 5th album, Seashells, and it was about deep sea sand mining.
Right.
Put your hands up to talk about, getting off the fence. It's far too crowded in terms of activism. So if I look back on the songs, and I'm Whole World's Watching came off my last album, and we're like, I think they are. They're watching us. We're about to repeal some groundbreaking legislation. So you kind of look at these songs and go, jeepers, that sucks. They're still relevant. Yeah, funny, eh?
And you're still doing it today. Chewy was talking, I know, before we came on. You're supposed to keep your powder dry, Chewy, but about some of your interviews, and that's what we've done here. We've showed portions of lots of your interviews that you've been having on Te Ao with Moana, and the David Seymour one, and Winston Peters, and they've just it is one of the best interviewing shows I think New Zealand's produced. And there's people in the chat. I don't know if you starred those, Chewy, but there's people in the chat just talking about, how it's free flowing ideas, and it's just amazing, and it's so cool to have you on as well. And thinking about your sort of career, like I was singing R-A-E-O-U when I was a teenager, not thinking about it, like not thinking too much about it. And that's what I was saying. Looking back over some of the catalogs, and I'm like, so is that where I first learned the vowels for Māori? Is that where I first picked up on them without even knowing?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I used to get sick of my name being mutilated over intercoms at the airport, and people going, they say, "Oh, what's your name?" Moana Maniapoto. "Oh, can you spell it for me?" Well, after a few years, I said, "No, you spell it. Give it a shot, and then I'll correct you," because it just got really, really hoha. So that was a way of trying to say, okay, let's put our language, let's do something really basic. Because the funny thing is, when you travel around the world and you go to different countries, most countries, the way they pronounce the vowel sounds is very much like Māori, like Japan.
Yeah.
Parts of Europe and stuff like that. It's really only England that doesn't do it similar. So, Spain, blah, blah, blah. So, it was just part of a movement. And, of course, that was hard on the heels of, that was probably about 10 years after the Kohanga Reo movement got started. My son, who's my producer, he went to we had to build a Kohanga Reo. I mean, well, when I say we, I'm using the royal we kind of hired people who can do that stuff. In the early 90s, it wasn't the normal thing. In fact, I remember going back to my marae or talking to my parents and them going, "Oh, how's that going to work? We can't," my mum would say, "Oh, I won't be able to understand it." I go, "Mum, you just speak in English." We were kind of making it up as we went along. And then, the lovely thing is today, this week, last week I went to my daughter, she's 15. I went to her prize giving at Western Springs Waiordia, which is in a co-governance relationship. Heaps of real, everybody really, really happy, awesome parents there. And today I went to my moko's kohanga, Ritimana at Richmond Road Primary. And you see all these little cute kids all singing away in the language, and you think, oh my God, everybody else, get with the program. I think it's really exciting how many people I know, Pākehā even, have dedicated themselves to learning Te Reo. I think it's really, really reaffirming.
Yeah, it's interesting to look as well. I moved to Dunedin from Auckland about a decade ago. Yeah, from Auckland to Dunedin, and watching it in Dunedin, because when I moved to Dunedin, I felt like I'd moved to Norway. Like I'd gone away from living in West Auckland and going to the Mount Albert Pack and Save, and just it being a multicolored adventure, to Dunedin, where I counted 50 people in the Pack and Save, all white. And it just felt very strange. But in the decade it's been here, hearing how people are picking up on, or at least giving a crack pronunciation and Māori words and vowels and stuff, and it's amazing to see, because I've always said that, you know, what differentiates us from, say, Australia, South Africa, these colonized, primarily Pākehā white, southern hemisphere countries, and it's the indigenous aspect of us, be it the people, or the plants or the animals. That's the only thing that's different. So we should all somewhat grab on to the Māori story, own it for ourselves, even if we're not kind of bloodlined into it, because if we're a Kiwi, then it should be a part of our story, surely.
I know, and I think one of the most exciting things with my band Moana and the Tribe, we travelled extensively. So from 2002 onwards, for well over 25 years, God, I'm so old. My band and I were travelling all over the world. We very rarely played in New Zealand. We played in all parts of Europe, across Russia, in places like Vladivostok and Moscow, in Asia, in South Korea, in Australia, various festivals, in Kanaki, Vanuatu. So and what we found, and we went up to the Arctic, where the Sami people are the indigenous people that were at the top of Europe. Okay, and so you got indigenous people up there who are white, blonde, blue-eyed, staunch to the max, trying to save their languages that kind of got almost decimated by the Norwegians and the Swedish and the Russian and the Finnish. And when I first went up there and landed there, and I thought, and I've often told the story of my partner and I were taking some of our documentaries up there to a festival, the coolest festival in the world. That's what I was billed as, because it was freaking freezing. And, reindeers, the works. And I thought, we'll be the first Māoris there. No one will even know. You get a little bit of a thrill. It might be slightly exotic for a moment after being hammered at home. And then someone goes, are you the Māoris from New Zealand? And we go, yeah. Do you know Timothy Karetu? I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you want to come and see our kohanga reo? So up in this tiny little village called Inari in the Arctic Circle, 500 kilometres inside the Arctic Circle in Finland, they had a language nest that was modelled on the kohanga reo. And when my partner and I went back there about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, I can't remember when, we met some of the graduates from that. And there was a young fella up there. He's the only rapper, hip-hop artist in the world performing in the Inari Sami tongue. And that's a direct result of the game-changing visionary movement that the kohanga reo started. That's taken off around the world. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah.
I have a very good friend from Finland, and when she traveled through here, she drew lots of parallels between the preservation of Māori language and what the Sami people were doing, and what the Finnish people were doing to preserve their language as well, after being, part of two other countries in their history as well. So, I love it when people identify those parallels. And it just shows the value. Like when people say, or why would anybody want to learn Māori? What value does it have overseas? Well, you wouldn't say that to a French person. You wouldn't say that to an Italian person. So why do we not value something that is, exclusively from here?
Yeah, I know. And the biggest joke was, people would say, waste of time learning that language because you won't get a real job. Well, things have really changed over the years. Scotty Morrison, who's one of my haka performers, Polder Sharples. Scotty's on Te Karere every night. Polder Sharples is teaching up at the University of Auckland. Te reo is in great demand, and no matter what any politician or anyone says, it's celebrated. It's celebrated both here and overseas. And that colonizing experience is something that means that we can identify with a lot of people offshore and immediately build a rapport and share strategies. I was in Sweden at the Global Investigative Journalists Conference as a guest of the Indigenous Journalists Association, and met journalists from Colombia, from Canada, Taiwan, America, Hawaii, because we always think they're separate, And, you know, there was just this immediate boom. We get it. Okay, how can we work together? What can we collaborate on? What are the challenges you're facing? Oh, they're the same as us. Oh, not enough Māori journalists, not enough Indigenous independent platforms, not enough resource going into investigative journalism. So, yeah, there's lots of exchanges going on around the world in media, justice, education, treaty, the arts, and that's what's really, and the climate, of course, that's what's really exciting.
I'd love to get your take on what I would technically call the horse shit going on in Parliament at the moment over the whole, you know, the Māori language, Māori names, changing the names of departments, although when they don't want to change it, like Kāinga Ora, sorry,
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's okay not to change it, even though their agreement says they have to change it, but they're not going to change it because everyone knows it as that, but they are going to be forced to change it. And who are they speaking to, and what's that all about? What's behind it, do you think?
I mean, I'm sort of getting a little bit conspiratorial in that I think that sometimes I think that we're getting distracted by these petty little arguments over te reo and you know, Māori Indigenous, blah blah blah, and that might be making us look away from some other bigger things that are happening, because it really is just pointless. Yes, they'll be speaking to a small base of people, but things have just gone too far. We've been on a roll for a long time, so I'm not convinced that there's any robustness around this kind of a strategy. I had kind of hoped that New Zealand First and these other parties, that once they got in, they'd sort of, you know, man up and kind of like stop all that carry on, and stop the sort of the biting, the slogans, the platitudes, the sound bites that all sound like New Year's resolutions, but there's no actual information on how to, you know, achieve these lofty goals. I'd sort of hope that they would morph from being very prickly kind of opponents in opposition to like, okay, we're going to stop running that previous lockdown, and here's how we're going to transform things. But there just seems to, unfortunately, be lots of New Year's resolutions and nothing grunty. It's visionary, just lots of peeling back. It's like cancel culture of mega proportions. It's quite radical too, I think.
Yeah.
Winding back, backtracking on every incremental step that many of us have felt frustrated about over the years, when you know, winding back on those. It's quite I think it's quite stressful. I find it quite stressful. My friends will find it quite stressful.
Yeah, it's certainly like, I mean, after the election, I was kind of thinking, okay, well, it'll be bad. We'll have stuff to talk about for 3 years, but at the end of the day, Labour and National aren't really that far apart. They're both centrist parties. It'll be okay. And then what we saw since then is just attack after attack after attack on Māori.
Yeah.
And it just seems mean and vicious, and it's just winding back so much progress over the last 20-25 years.
Yes.
That it's like, that's me as a white guy tucked away down here in New Zealand, you know, down in the South Island, that can see the benefits and is aware of where he lives in the world. I can't imagine what it's like to be Māori and to see this in the news cycle day after day after day after day. And as you said, look, you were talking about this in the 90s, and oh, look, we're back. We're still talking about it. Fantastic. How do you keep the momentum going?
Oh, well, it's a few Chardonnays does the trick. Honestly, it's going out and seeing our kids, you know, and the mokos and young people that are sort of all fired up and ready to rock. But there are lots of Pākehā and other allies and champions, you know. And so I remember on our show celebrating Pākehā allies and champions. And now I know that a woman who was a real game changer, Mitzi Nee, and she passed away, and her funeral is on tomorrow. Now, she was part of an anti-racist group in the 80s, her and the likes of Bob Lowe and Mitzi's husband, Ray Nen, people like Bernie Homfleck, who I think just turned 90. You know, this is an older generation that really stuck their necks out back in the 80s, in the 70s probably, when people like Sid Jackson, Tutuwhai, a whole bunch of Māori were getting hammered. So you had this parallel growth. And I think that there are some wonderful allies and champions out there that understand that power sharing and the tiriti relationship is enabling. It's not a handbrake, as my friend Ngahiwi Moana described it. The treaty is an enabler. It's something that we can actually celebrate. It's something that's inclusive and it's visionary. And it's only the fragile and the fearful and there's a lot of that around the world. We saw over in Australia how the voice to Parliament was undermined. And there are, as they told us in Sweden, multiple players across multiple platforms working to undermine things which often are focused on Indigenous people, because if you give Indigenous people rights and decision-making power, often that means decision-making power over biodiversity or around the climate, and that might mean putting the brakes on, oil and gas exploration, or, fresh water being transformed into water bottling plants. So there's influences out there that are very well organised, right-wing think tanks that they spoke about a lot in Sweden that feed into, political rhetoric. Yeah.
We've got some questions that are coming in from people who are watching. First one is from Rua, MD. Has Luxon agreed to join Moana for an interview next year to give respect to Māori media?
I would hope so. We haven't reached out to him. The only interview that I secured with him was in April 2022. And, he had just come fresh in his job. He was very nice. We had a robust discussion around the direction of the health system. He insisted that the Māori Health Authority be disabandoned and that we go back to the previous status quo for the last, I don't know how many million years, of having a Māori health unit inside the Ministry of Health. He could not point to any evidence that justified that, but I sort of get the feeling that evidence isn't really a big thing at the moment with a lot of policy.
Another one, Ethan wants to basically know, you've got any predictions for Waitangi? It feels like Waitangi is going to be a cracker. I don't know whether that means good or bad cracker, but it's going to be, shall we say, volatile, whatever that also means. What do you think about Waitangi next year?
Cheapest. Well, I'm going to be there. Come hell or high water, I'm going to be there. Waitangi has always been a cracker, and I think it would augur well for all the political leaders if they go up there. They will be challenged. It's interesting the number of political leaders from the north, Māori political leaders like David Seymour and Winston Peters, Shane Jones, Shane Areti. So, they'll be held to account. And I think, that they'll have to put up with it. They'll have to debate. They'll have to stand their ground. And they will expect a forceful opposition to many of their policies.
It feels like the conversations are a little bit upside down at the moment. Now, I'm not an expert, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had Deb Naruapaka on the other night, and she was talking about the treaty actually being there so Pākehā could stay. So actually it's available for Pākehā to be here, and today we kind of see it as a Māori-only thing. I was thinking as well about co-governance. We were talking about co-governance in time the treaty time was like allowing the settlers to come to the table with Māori because they were well outnumbered, whereas now it's flipped over and people are selling it as if it's, we'll let Māori come to the table. I'm wondering first, is that accurate? Thinking that it's kind of flipped, and do you have anything to speak to on that?
Well, I found it really fascinating, and this is one of the things, an ongoing argument that I have with David Seymour is about his interpretation of the treaty, because first off, it was an international agreement. It was an international agreement, and Debbie Ngāti Wapeka is quite right. It gave immigrants the right to have a relationship and have a place here in Aotearoa. Māori did outnumber Pākehā. All the conversation was in Māori. So Māori knew exactly what they were signing. They certainly would never cede sovereignty. I mean, that's what tribes would kill and die for.
Well, it doesn't make any logical sense. You've got 100,000 Māori and 2,000 Europeans. You're not going to go, oh yeah, you guys can run the spot now. It doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah, so that's how it was explained to me a million years ago by people who were my mentors, Rob Cooper from Ngāti Hine and Ruarakina. So that's what it did was it created a relationship, and Kāwanatanga allowed the British and all immigrants to take care of themselves. The Crown would take care of themselves. They'd dumpty-doo, there's your laws, whatever. And Māori would chug along, as we do. And then where needed, there would be this, as Moana Jackson described, a relational space where you kind of come in the middle, So Ned Fletcher, whose huge book I've got my thing balanced on, it's like really, really big. It's so big that I'll drop my laptop. He did a huge 7-year thesis where he looked at the context and the history around the British signing and coming up with a treaty. And his conclusion was their understanding of cession, or whatever was given and taken, was exactly the same as Māori. There wasn't an assumption by the British at that time that they were completely in control. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to say otherwise. So you have this model. That is the ultimate co-governance model. The model we talk about with the Māori Health Authority is not an authentic, robust co-governance model. It's more of a devolution one, but it's one step up from the Crown going, okay, I think we'll pick those Māoris over there, those Māoris over there, and dish out the money, because you have Māori there, and they'll go, I think we will pick them, So the word co-governance has been a little bit kind of muted. And then of course the old numbers game happened. So when more and more immigrants came to New Zealand, Pākehā immigrants, suddenly they changed the rules and said, oh, we changed it now. It's one vote, one person, one vote. Well, that's why everyone's been arguing about it since forever. That's why there's been land marches, there's been battles, there's been petitions, there's been tribunals, because Māori don't accept that.
Hey, as someone that spent a bit of time talking to David Seymour, one question that I've got is he co-opts a lot of language that I would consider from race relations discussions, that we should all be equal and equal rights for everyone, and we definitely don't want apartheid and that sort of thing. And he's kind of co-opted those things that, of course, right-thinking people want things to be equal. But it comes from just completely wiping away any historical context to what has happened in this country and others. Do you think, in your view, that comes from a personally held belief, or is it more an angle that he's playing? I mean, how has he come across to you?
I think it's ideological. I think because the same language is used, like in Australia around the voice. We heard the same things with Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, who are two very high-profile Indigenous politicians. We heard the same kind of stuff around separatism, division, racism. So the whole, and I heard that from my friends in the States, my journalist friends, Native Americans and Native Canadians. So it's a common kind of a trope, and it reduces any discussion of the treaty down to one. They reframe it as something around ethnicity or race, when really it is about indigeneity. It's about indigeneity and it's about nationhood. That, you know, I find the twisting of the word apartheid hugely offensive, and words like separatism and all that, because it also assumes that there's a level playing field. If you put the whole treaty thing aside, it's like, oh, we're all the same. Well, actually, we're not all the bloody same.
No,
And
exactly.
whenever I've talked to him about, because he'll go, we need to address the needs of people need to be addressed. Well, isn't it a funny thing that need and indigeneity and inequity all coincide? I mean, you'd think that you'd twig that there's something not quite right, you know?
Yeah.
That they're one and the same thing. And that's the same for all colonized Indigenous people.
So I guess that's my follow-on then, is like, I don't want to say that Seymour is dim, but surely he's so close to making that jump. But he's just going, no, definitely not linking those things together. I'm just going to keep on hitting these talking points. And whenever I've seen him push back on, like you've done so well in your interviews, and I've seen him in that position before, he doesn't seem to have a fallback discussion or a point where he goes, well, maybe I need to think about this a bit more.
I think he's very clever. I think he's very savvy. I think he's someone I need to study more in terms of his interview technique, because he pivots, he twists, he'll come back with a question.
That's a good tactic it is.
Completely unrelated, like I'm talking about, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and somehow he ended up talking about, well, we need potholes fixed. And I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah, I remember.
Yes.
Potholes.
It's like, oh, you want me to talk about this? I'm going to jump over here.
Yes, which is a very, very, clever technique. And it's a distracting one. And, I think him and Winston are very savvy with the media. I mean, I get on fine with them. I find both of them really challenging to interview because of their little games, and particularly Winston. He's got to think out the media, but he was quite respectful when I interviewed him. He talks about the mainstream media, blah, blah, not you, Moana. I'm not saying you. But it's it was a real pleasure after. Oh my God, I did them both on the same day. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Yeah.
So there were a few stiff drinks that night. I'm taking it.
I had many. I had it for a couple of days. That's how triggered I was. And then I interviewed Debbie Ngāti and James Shaw, who I hadn't met. I hadn't met James, like one after another. I thought, oh, they're so lovely, because you're not having to go right back to basics.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You can actually, and even with Chris Hipkins, you can actually have a more nuanced discussion. You can go, well, why don't you thing the capital gains tax, or why don't you push here, poor? Why are you so reticent, whereas with the other two, it's just like, no, we're all the same. You're just all being racist by raising the treaty, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, it was quite lovely to end on interviewing those other ones.
I think what we see in David Seymour in particular, if he is really smart, and Bomber said that as well, and you're saying that, then I don't believe him. Because if he's smart, he knows what he's saying. If he's dim, he might be an ideologue. Because I've said this to him in an interview. I've said to him that the reason people look at what you're saying and they tag the word racist or racial to it, or racially dividing to it, is when you ask for everyone to be the same, you only ever apply it to race. Like race is a protected class in the human rights, yeah. But so is gender, so is age, so is religion, so is disability. You're never saying let's make ourselves equal with all these disabled people. Or you're never saying we all need to be equal with these older people. 65-year-olds shouldn't be able to get a pension when the 64-year-olds do. And he knows that. And if he never thought of it before, I've told him that. And he still kicks on this base about he wants to level what he thinks is the race element in society. The truth is, if he wanted to level it, there'd be a whole bunch up here that need to come down. That actually would be a way to level it, rather than just saying Maori are getting too much and this, that, and the other. So I mean, you're not the only person who said he's smart, but I don't get smart with someone who can't see that link, unless he's just that much of an ideologue.
Well, he took a lot of inspiration from the institute that he was attending quite a bit in Canada, and they have a rather interesting record in terms of that sort of libertarian, thing. And actually, when I raised it with him, that institute had sort of been very dismissive of deaths of Indigenous people in residential care, he was actually surprised about that. But I think that, there are groups out there, part of the, the Atlas Network and stuff like that, that have got huge influence on different people, different politicians. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's links here. It's just starting to ring true in terms of looking at what happened in Australia and The Voice and people joining the dots.
Yeah.
I think Atlas Network being operating here and funding here and giving people ideas here is 100% what's happening. Yeah, no doubt in my mind.
You kind of feel like you're going down a rabbit hole when you start talking like that, eh? And then you think, well, no, actually, there's a lot of there's rabbit holes, and then there's a whole bunch of like investigative and journalists and academics and researchers who can actually show these various connections. But yeah, it does sound kind of interesting, eh?
Hey, Moana,
in the summer break, I'm going to put one of those pin boards behind here that I'll link ideas with red threads and see how crazy we can go.
Thank you for joining us tonight. We've kept you for longer than we said we would, but it's been an absolute pleasure. Before you head off, two quick things, and I think there's one text in there that I definitely want to share, Chewy, and it's this one here. Shayad Taikato, my uncle Fetu Taikato was a dancer for Moana and the Moa Hunters back in the day. We have a What Now clip from way back. There you go.
Oh, gracious, there you go. I worked out that I've had 22 I wonder if that was a Kua Makona video. See, I did a video on to try and help reach out to Māori to stop drinking as much, kind of ironic, and to stop smoking. So I had dances, and that might have been that one. But I was also just going to mention that today I spent a lot of time on this week looking at the repeal of the smoke-free legislation, which has driven me and many, many people crazy, not just Māori either. It's created a shock around the world. I interviewed a number of people over this. And in 1996, from 1996 to 2004, I was the National Māori Smoke-Free Coordinator. That was my job. My job was to kind of bring all these different hauora groups together. And when I think back in the day, we were talking about, let's have smoke-free marae, and all the aunties would go, oh, shut up, bugger off. And because they'd have these big fruit tins, empty tins on the marae, you could smoke up large, chuck them in. It took a lot of advocacy from many people to transform that, and to actually, when you think back to, when we went smoke-free bars and cafes, and the horror was that, all these businesses are going to collapse. Well, they went gangbusters. Everyone's happy chappies. So, to sort of move now to this position where there's going to be a repeal of a very groundbreaking piece of legislation that would see a smoke-free generation in order to fund tax relief for people who don't need it, is horrific. So So I've been working with some of our smoke-free advocates, putting clips together and writing about it. But yeah, that was the one that shocked everybody.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to wrap up. What's your memory from 2023? But maybe because that's so fresh in your mind, it might be this smoking legislation going. What about 2024? What are you looking forward to, if anything? I'm sure there's lots of things.
Oh my goodness, 2024. It's like, I feel like a little bit punch drunk from 2023. You know, we had Jacinda Ardern resigned way back in February or something, and then we had the cyclone. So I'm at Miriwai Beach, and that's still a mess for a number of people out there. And then the floods, and then we had this terrible war in Gaza, and it's been a tough year for a lot of people, eh? I kind of think that 2024 people are going to mobilize. I think that we're all going to get our marching shoes on. I think journalists are going to collaborate and share. I think academics and scientists are all going to come together. So I think, in 2024, we're going to get ready to rumble in a very incisive, organized, strategic, positive way. That's my prediction.
I saw a TikTok the other day that, I'm paraphrasing it, but it was a guy taking the piss saying, who would know that we'd finally bring Māori together to speak with one voice, thanks to Winston Peters and David Seymour, two Māori from up north going the other way.
The irony is not lost on us. Yeah.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for, look, honestly, thank you for trusting us. I know you didn't really know who we are or anything, but trusting us and coming on and saying g'day. Really enjoyed it. And so is the chat. Everyone's going bananas to say we love you. So.
Oh, you're kind. Meri kirihi mite and kia kaha. Whawhai tonu tātou katoa. Ake tonu ake. Go out there and spread the word about the treaty, okay?
We will do. And you tell us anytime. Tell us anytime what you want to come back on or share stuff with us that we can share to our audience, Moana.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Right. Thanks for joining us.